The night Soraya Vance learned what she was worth, she was holding a silver tray of untouched espresso cups outside her husband's study. 3 months married, 22 years old. Standing in a hallway lined with portraits of dead Castellan men who had all looked at their wives the same way her husband looked at her, like furniture that occasionally needed rearranging. She was about to knock when she heard her name, not the soft Soraya he used at dinner. The other one. The one he used when he forgot she was a person. "She's a womb, Renzo. Nothing more." Her hand froze above the door. The voice belonged to Matteo Castellan, her husband. The man who had placed a 5-carat ring on her finger in front of 200 witnesses and promised, in a cathedral older than her grandmother, to honor her. Whose name she now carried like a brand burned into her skin. "You don't have to be cruel about it," another voice said. Lower, calmer. That was Renzo Vasari, Matteo's consigliere, the one with the quiet eyes who always seemed to be solving a puzzle. "I'm not being cruel, I'm being honest." Glass clinked against glass. "She gives me a son. The family stays intact. The alliance with her father holds, and everyone wins. She doesn't, and I'll have the marriage annulled by spring. That's the arrangement. That's all it ever was." "And if she falls in love with you?" A pause. Then a laugh. Short, dry, almost bored. "Then that's her problem, not mine." Soraya didn't move. The cups on the tray rattled, just once, a tiny porcelain confession. She steadied them with the kind of stillness she had learned in the first week of this marriage. The kind that came from understanding that survival in the Castellan house meant becoming unhearable. "You're a real piece of work, Matteo. I'm a realist. Sentiment is what gets men killed in this life. My father taught me that before I could ride a bike." Another sip. "Besides, look at her. She's beautiful. She's quiet. And she does what she's told. She'll make a fine mother. Whatever she thinks this is, that's not my concern. Whatever she thinks this is." Soraya stood in the hallway and listened to her husband price her like cattle at auction. She didn't cry. Instead, something inside her went very, very still. "Before I tell you what she did next, and trust me, you've never seen a woman do what Soraya Vance did over the next 21 days. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Smash that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Now let's go back to that hallway." The espresso was getting cold. Soraya turned and walked back down the corridor toward the kitchen. Her heels made no sound on the runner. They had taught her that too. How to disappear in plain sight while 3 generations of Castellan men made decisions about her body across a polished mahogany table. In the kitchen, she set the tray down. The cook, an older woman named Yusra Ahmadi, who had been with the family longer than Matteo had been alive, glanced up from kneading dough and froze. "Mrs. Castellan, are you ill?" "No." Soraya's voice came out even. "I'm fine, Yusra. Could you take this in to my husband, please? I have a headache." Yusra studied her for a long moment. Whatever she saw made her wipe her hands slowly on her apron and nod without another word. Soraya climbed the staircase to the 3rd floor. The bedroom Matteo had assigned her was at the end of the east wing, far from his own. He visited on Tuesdays and Saturdays, twice a week, like a doctor's appointment. She closed the door behind her, locked it, walked to the window and looked at her reflection in the dark glass. A young woman stared back, long dark hair pinned up the way Matteo preferred. Pearl earrings he had given her on their wedding day. A gray silk dress that cost more than the apartment her mother had raised her in, eyes like wet ink. She had stopped recognizing this woman months ago. Tonight, for the first time, she didn't try to. Soraya pressed her palm flat against the cold glass and made herself a promise. Quietly, the way prayers are made when you're not sure anyone is listening. If I'm going to be his arrangement, then he's going to be mine too. And when this ends, and it will end, he won't be the one who walks away whole. She smiled, just slightly. It was not a kind smile. Then she turned off the light, sat down on the edge of the bed she barely slept in, and began to think. The Castellan estate sat on 40 acres of cypress and stone, an hour outside the city, behind iron gates that opened only for cars the gatekeeper recognized. Inside the walls, time moved differently. Slower. Heavier. The way time moves in places that are used to keeping secrets. Soraya had been walking these halls for 90 days, perfecting the art of being weather. Present. Unremarkable. Easily ignored. She knew which floorboards creaked. She knew which staff would meet her eyes and which wouldn't. She knew that Matteo's mother, Donna Bianca Castellan, took her morning tea on the south veranda at exactly 7:15, and that the Donna's gaze, when it landed on her new daughter-in-law, contained roughly the same warmth she reserved for spilled wine. Soraya had learned all of this by being quiet, by watching, by understanding very early that in this house, information was the only currency a woman like her could carry. She had not always been quiet. Before her father, Idris Vance, had sat her down in his study 6 months ago and explained, in the careful voice he used for closing deals, that the Vance family was facing certain pressures and that a marriage had been arranged. Before all of that, Soraya had been someone else. She had been a third-year medical student, the girl who corrected her professors and won awards for surgical precision in cadaver labs. She had been engaged briefly to a kind boy named Adib, who wrote her poems and could not save her from what her father needed her to be. That girl had died on a Saturday in March, in a white dress, in front of 200 guests who had clapped politely as Matteo Castellan slid a ring onto her finger. Or so everyone assumed. What no one in this house knew, not Matteo, not his mother, not Renzo Vasari with his careful watching eyes, was that the girl from the medical school had not actually died. She had only been asked to lie down very still while Soraya the wife did the talking. Tonight, in the dark of her assigned bedroom, that girl sat up. Soraya opened the bottom drawer of her vanity, the one Matteo had inspected twice in the early weeks, and dismissed as containing nothing but womanly things. Beneath a layer of folded silk scarves, beneath a velvet box of jewelry she never wore, was a leather-bound notebook her mother had given her the morning of the wedding. "Write down what hurts," her mother had whispered at the chapel door. "And when the hurt has names and dates, you will know what to do with it." Her mother, Layla Vance, had been the daughter of a diplomat. She knew things about survival that she had never been allowed to speak aloud. Soraya opened the notebook to the first blank page. She picked up her pen, and in handwriting too steady to belong to a woman who had just been called a womb, she wrote a single line at the top of the page. 21 days. She did not yet know what she was counting toward. But she had heard, through the walls of this house, 3 separate references over the past month to something called the Founders' Banquet, a private gathering held once a year at the Castellan estate, where every powerful family within 300 miles came to eat at one long table and pretend they were not by daylight, trying to kill each other. The banquet was in 3 weeks. Matteo had not yet told her she was attending. He had not yet told her anything. That, Soraya decided, was about to become a very interesting problem for him. She closed the notebook and walked to her closet. Hanging at the very back, behind the rows of pale silks Matteo's stylist had selected for her, was a garment bag she had not opened since her wedding day. She unzipped it slowly. Inside was something her husband had never seen. Something her mother had pressed into her hands the night before the wedding with the words, "For the day you remember who you are." Soraya touched the fabric once, just once. Then she zipped the bag closed, returned to the bed, and for the first time in 90 nights, she slept. He came to her on a Tuesday. the way he always did. Soraya heard his footsteps on the stairs at exactly 10 o'clock. She was sitting at her vanity in a robe the color of bone, brushing her hair with the slow, methodical strokes she had learned to perform for him. The door opened without a knock. It always did. Soraya. Matteo. He crossed the room and stopped behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. He was a strikingly handsome man, her husband. Dark hair, jaw like cut stone, eyes the color of wet slate. She had thought, in the beginning, that perhaps something could be built with a face like that. She had been very young, 3 months ago. "You skipped dinner," he said. "I had a headache." "Yusra said you looked unwell." "I'm better now." He studied her in the glass. She could feel him searching her face for some crack. She gave him nothing. "Good," he said finally, "because I need to speak with you." "Of course. There's an event in 3 weeks, the Founders' Banquet. It's held here, at the estate. Every family of consequence will attend. You'll be expected to be present at my side. There are certain expectations of how you carry yourself, of what is said and not said. We'll arrange a stylist, a dress, whatever you require." She set the brush down, slowly, turned on the small velvet stool to face him directly. It was the first time in their marriage she had done that. Turned to face him, without him asking her to. She watched a flicker cross his expression. Something almost like surprise. "I'll attend," she said, "on one condition." He did not laugh, but she saw the corner of his mouth lift. "A condition," he repeated. "Yes. You're aware that my wife doesn't negotiate, Soraya. I'm aware that you've never asked her to. That's a different thing." He went very still. For the first time in 3 months, Matteo Castellan looked at her. Actually looked at her. The way a man looks at something he has just noticed is sharper than he assumed. "Go on," he said. Soraya folded her hands in her lap. Her voice, when it came, was perfectly level. "My mother has a sister. Her name is Naima. She lives in a small town 6 hours north of here, in a house that is failing around her. She has been ill for 2 years. The treatment she needs costs more than she has. And my father, for reasons that have nothing to do with money and everything to do with pride, will not help her. I want her treatment paid for in full, whatever it takes. I want it in writing, signed by your lawyer, before the banquet." Matteo did not move. "That's the condition?" "That's the condition. You could have asked for jewelry, a car, a house in another country. I'm not most women." The silence between them stretched. Outside her window, a dog began to bark and was sharply silenced. She watched him recalculate, his eyes flicking across her face the way they would flick across a contract he had just realized contained a clause he hadn't read. "And if I say no?" he asked, soft. "Then I'll attend the banquet because you'll make me, and I'll smile because you'll make me. But I won't be your wife in that room, Matteo. I'll be a woman wearing your ring. Everyone there will see it." She had expected anger. What she had not expected was the long, slow exhale he released, almost like a man setting down a weight he had not realized he was carrying. "You've been holding that in your mouth for a while, haven't you?" "For about a day." "Hmm." He turned, walked once across the room, came back. "Done." She blinked. "What?" "Your aunt's treatment. Done. I'll have Renzo draw the papers tomorrow." He tilted his head, studying her now with something that was no longer surprise but something more dangerous. Interest. "You're a more interesting woman than I gave you credit for, Soraya. You haven't been giving me credit at all, Matteo." The corner of his mouth lifted. This time, the smile was real, and that frightened her more than anything else that had happened tonight, because she understood that her husband had just begun, for the very first time, to see her. She had wanted that 3 months ago. Now she knew exactly how dangerous it was. He turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "By the way," he said, without looking back. "What changed?" Soraya kept her face still as marble. "Nothing changed, Mateo." He nodded once and stepped out. The door clicked shut behind him. Alone in the lamp-lit room, Soraya looked at the woman in the mirror. The woman looked back. And this time, for the first time in 90 days, Soraya recognized her. She picked up her notebook, opened to the page where she had written 21 days, and beneath it, she wrote a second line, 20 days. The signed papers arrived on her breakfast tray the next morning, tucked beneath a folded linen napkin like a love letter. Soraya read them twice. 3 years of full medical care for Naima Vance, a private nurse, a specialist flown in from Zurich if needed. Signed by Mateo, witnessed by Renzo, stamped by a notary whose seal she recognized from her father's own contracts. It was real. She set the papers down and allowed herself, for exactly 7 seconds, to feel something close to victory. Then she got up and began. The transformation was small at first, subtle enough that no one in the house could name it, only sense it, the way you sense a shift in air pressure before a storm. She stopped looking at the floor when she walked. She stopped angling her shoulders inward at dinner. When Donna Bianca asked her, with careful poison, whether she was feeling settled in the household, Soraya did not give the trembling smile she had been giving for 3 months. She set down her fork, met the older woman's eyes, and said, "I'm settling, Donna. Slowly. The way a foundation settles. It takes time, but the house holds better afterward." Donna Bianca's teacup paused halfway to her mouth. Mateo, at the head of the table, looked up from his phone for the first time in 10 minutes. Soraya returned to her food and did not look up again. Later that night, she slipped out through the kitchen garden gate, the only one not watched by cameras, a detail she had memorized in her second week, and walked the half-mile down the Cypress Road. She had asked Yusra that afternoon for a single favor. A phone. Not the one Mateo had given her, the one she knew was monitored. A different one. A clean one. Yusra had not asked why. She had pressed a small prepaid handset into Soraya's palm with the quiet words, "My nephew runs a shop. He is discreet. Anything else you need, you ask me." She stopped beneath a street lamp, far enough from the gates that the cameras could not see her, and dialed a number she had been carrying in her head for 91 days. A woman answered on the third ring. "Hello? Professor Idowu. It's Soraya Vance." A long pause. Then the voice softened, sharpened, became something between a teacher and a co-conspirator. "Soraya, where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm safe. I'm calling from a clean line. I don't have long." Professor Adesua Idowu had been Soraya's mentor at the medical school. The woman who had pulled her aside in the 3rd year and said, "You don't think like a student, you think like a surgeon." When Soraya had left school 4 months ago without warning, Idowu had been the only person who had refused to accept the silence. "Tell me what you need," Idowu said. "I need to know if my place is still open." "Soraya, you completed 3 full years. You finished your clinical rotations in the top 1%. Your place hasn't closed. I haven't let it close. I told the dean you were on personal leave. I have been telling him that every month for a year. When can you come back?" Soraya looked up at the street lamp, at the moth circling the bulb, at the small ordinary miracle of being asked by another human being when you can come back, as if she had ever been free to leave. "I don't know yet," she said quietly. "But I will. I am telling you tonight that I will, and I needed someone to know." "Then I know," Idowu said. "And I'll be here. Whatever it costs you to get out of wherever you are, Soraya. Pay it. Don't flinch." Soraya ended the call standing very still in the dark. She walked home a different woman than the one who had walked out. What she did not know What she could not have known, standing under that lamp with the moths and the quiet, was that 2 miles away, in a study lined with leather books, Renzo Vasari was already studying a security report that had pinged on his desk 40 minutes ago. A small one, easy to miss. Movement near the North Service Gate, 9:47 p.m. Single figure, female, untracked. Renzo read the line twice. He did not show it to Matteo. He folded the paper in half, slid it into his desk drawer, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. Information, Soraya's mother used to say, is the only weapon a woman is allowed to carry without being arrested for it. Over the next 4 days, Soraya armed herself. She began in the most dangerous place in the house, Matteo's study, when he was not in it. She had access. She was his wife. The staff had been trained not to question her. She walked in at 11 in the morning under the pretext of returning a book, closed the door behind her, and spent 43 minutes learning the geography of her husband's life. She did not touch the desk drawers. What she touched was the things he left in the open. The things a man in his world left in the open precisely because he assumed his wife would never know what she was looking at. The leather appointment book on the side table. She read the dates that had been crossed out, 3 of them in the past month, each crossed out with the same small notation, postponed. FB. He was clearing his calendar around the banquet. The crystal decanters on the bar cart. 2 of them were nearly empty. The third, the expensive one, was still sealed. He is drinking more than he was 3 months ago, she noted. Something is pressuring him. She left the study the same way she entered it, slowly, carrying a book. That evening, she sat at dinner and let Donna Bianca talk about the banquet's seating arrangements. She let Matteo discuss, with Renzo, the families that had confirmed their attendance. The Adeyemis, the Lindqvists, the Halabis, the Okonkwo cartel from the south. She let names wash over her like rain, and she committed every single one to memory. Later, in her room, she opened her notebook and began to draw. Not a list. A map. In the center, she wrote Matteo. Around him, in concentric rings, she placed the names. Allies on the inner ring, rivals on the outer. Neutral parties at the edges. She drew lines between them. Alliances she had overheard, debts she had inferred, weddings between cousins. By 2 in the morning, she had begun to see the architecture of her husband's power and, more importantly, its weak points. She was a third-year medical student. She had been trained to look at a body and find what was wrong with it before the body itself knew. A family was just a body with more legs. On the 5th morning, Matteo's stylist arrived, a slender man with a small army of assistants and a rolling rack of dresses in colors Soraya had been told suited her. Pale rose, champagne, pearl, the colors of women who were meant to be looked at and then forgotten. Mr. Castellan was very specific, the stylist said brightly. He requested something elegant, restrained. Bridal, he said. Mr. Castellan is not the one wearing it. The stylist's smile flickered. I beg your pardon? Soraya stepped back from the dresses. Thank you for coming, she said. I'll be selecting my own gown for the banquet. Please send Mr. Castellan my regards. Mrs. Castellan, he was quite specific. And I am quite specific now. Leave the rack. Take your assistants. The stylist left without coffee. That night, Matteo did not come up at 10. He came up at 11:30. He did not knock. You sent Florian away. I did. He came on my orders, Soraya. He came with dresses, Matteo, not orders. There's a difference. He stared at her. She stood in the middle of the room in her bone-colored robe, her hair down for the first time in his presence, her eyes utterly steady. He looked for one unguarded second like a man who was no longer entirely sure what room he had walked into. What are you doing? He asked. Not angry. Just quiet. I'm getting dressed for your banquet. That isn't what I'm asking. She knew what he was asking. She held his eyes and did not answer. He stood there a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, almost to himself, and turned to leave. At the door, without looking back, he said, "Whatever you're planning, Soraya, I hope it's worth it." The door closed. She stood very still in the lamplight. Then she walked to her closet, reached behind the rows of pale silks, and pulled out the garment bag her mother had given her the night before her wedding, the one she had not opened in 95 days. She unzipped it, and for the first time, by the soft yellow light of her bedside lamp, Soraya looked at what was inside. Her mother had sewn it herself. Soraya understood that now, holding the dress up against her body in the lamplight, feeling the weight of the silk, seeing the tiny hand-stitched constellation of beadwork along the hem. Her mother, Layla Vance, who had given up a career as a textile designer when she married a Vance man, had spent 6 months making this dress in secret in the small back room of her sister Naima's house in the north, while her daughter was being measured for a wedding gown chosen by someone else. The fabric was the deep, slow blue of the sky in the moments after a thunderstorm passes. Long sleeves. A neckline that did not plunge but did not hide. Beadwork that caught the lamplight and threw it back like coastline at night. Folded at the bottom of the garment bag was a note in her mother's handwriting. "Soraya, my heart. If you are reading this, you have remembered. Wear it on the day you decide who you are. The dress will not save you, but you will not need saving by then." Mama Soraya read the note 4 times. Then she folded it carefully, slid it into her notebook, and made a decision. The dress needed work. 95 days in this house had thinned her, and the fit at the waist would be wrong. She needed a seamstress outside the Castellan family's reach. She found her 2 days later in a small shop on the east side of the city. The shop did not have a sign. Yusra had drawn her a map on the back of a grocery list. The seamstress's name was Zenobia Marchetti, 64 years old, who had been making clothing for the women of the city's most dangerous families for 41 of those years. She worked from a converted apartment 2 flights above a bakery. The first thing she said when Soraya walked in was, "Yusra called. Sit." Soraya sat. Zenobia took the dress from the bag, lifted it into the light, and went very still. She ran a finger along the beadwork on the hem. She turned the seam at the waist inside out and examined the stitching the way a doctor examines a wound. "Who made this?" she asked without looking up. "My mother." Zenobia looked up. "Then your mother is a woman I would have liked to know." She looked at Soraya for a long time after that. Whatever she found there made her nod once, sharply, and stand up. "Take it off the hanger. I need to see it on you." The fitting took 2 hours. When she was done, she stood back and said, "Your mother made you a dress to be seen in. Tell me, are you ready to be seen?" Soraya looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was not Mrs. Castellan. She was not anyone's wife. She was a woman in her mother's hands, in her mother's blue, in a dress that had been sewn in secret across 180 nights of love and rebellion. Soraya's eyes filled. She did not let them spill. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm ready." Zenobia touched her shoulder once. "Come back in 13 days. It will be finished." And Soraya. The old woman's eyes were very dark and very steady. "When you wear this, do not let any man in that room tell you what you are. Not your husband, not your father, not the dead men whose names you carry. Wear it and let them find out." Soraya walked the 4 blocks back to where Yusra's nephew was waiting with the car, and she did not feel the cold. She felt, for the first time since her wedding day, like a woman walking in her own skin. That night, alone in her room, she opened the notebook and wrote a 3rd line beneath the others. 13 days. She closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark with her eyes open, listening to the house breathe around her. And the silence did not feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a held breath, and she was the one about to exhale. The night before the banquet, Soraya could not sleep. It was not fear exactly. Fear would have been simpler. What she felt was the feeling of standing on the edge of a high place and understanding, with absolute clarity, that the next step would be a step she could never take back. She lay in bed for an hour, then two. Then she got up. The house was asleep. Somewhere on the lower floor, a clock chimed 3. Soraya walked barefoot to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Her hand drifted to the drawer of her vanity. She opened it without looking and pulled out the envelope she had hidden there 4 days ago. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. A printed letter from the office of Professor Adesua Idowu, Dean's seal at the top. 3 short paragraphs of formal language. We are pleased to confirm Ms. Soraya Vance's reinstatement, effective the upcoming term. Idowu had mailed it to a post office box Yusra's nephew had opened in his own name. It had reached Soraya's hand in a paper bag of bread. She held the letter in the lamplight for a long time. She was not yet free. The banquet was in 17 hours. Anything could go wrong. Matteo could discover the phone, the dress, the bank account she had quietly opened with the money her mother had slipped her after the wedding. Renzo could speak. The whole architecture she had built in 20 days could collapse before sunset tomorrow. But the letter was real. The letter was a door. Even if the door was on the other side of a long dark room she still had to cross. Soraya folded it back into its envelope and placed it inside the cover of her notebook. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed and did something she had not done in a very long time. She prayed, not in any particular language, just, quietly, to her mother, who was alive in a small house in the north, and to her grandmother, who was not, and to whatever part of her own self had been whispering to her, all these months, hold on, your turn is coming. She heard footsteps in the hall. Soraya went still. The footsteps stopped outside her door. For a long moment, nothing. Then a soft knock. Once, almost apologetic. Soraya. Matteo. Quiet. Almost. And this was the strangest thing of all. Uncertain. She crossed the room and opened the door. He was standing in his shirt sleeves. No jacket, no tie, a glass of something amber in his hand. The slate eyes were not cold tonight. They looked tired. It's 3 a.m, she said. I know. What is it, Matteo? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very low, you're going to do something tomorrow. I can feel it. I don't know what it is, but I want you to know, before whatever happens, that I see you now. Her heart did something cruel in her chest. She kept her face still. That's an interesting thing to say to your wife at 3 a.m. I know. He took a small breath. I haven't been a good husband to you, Soraya. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm telling you that I know it. And I'm telling you, I'd rather you do whatever you're going to do tomorrow with your eyes open than with mine closed. She studied him. The arrangement, she thought, had begun to crack on his side too, and that made him more dangerous, not less. Good night, Matteo. Good night, Soraya. He turned and walked back down the hallway. She closed the door, locked it, and stood with her back pressed against the wood until she heard the distant click of his bedroom door closing on the other side of the house. Then she walked to the window and looked at her own reflection in the dark glass. I see you too, Soraya whispered to her reflection. It was the first true thing anyone had said in this house in a very long time. The founders' banquet began at 7 p.m. By 6:45, the Cypress Drive was lined with black cars. The estate had been transformed for the night. The great hall opened, the long table set for 42, candles lit along every wall. The family crest of the Castellans hanging behind the head seat in a banner of crimson silk that had hung in this room, in some form, for 112 years. Matteo stood at the entrance to the great hall in a black suit that fit him the way armor fits a man who has worn it since boyhood. Donna Bianca, in deep emerald, was already greeting the Adiemis at the door. Renzo moved through the hall like smoke. Soraya was upstairs. Zenobia had delivered the dress that morning. Yusra had helped her into it and done her hair. Pulled up from her neck in a low, simple twist, fastened with a single pin that had belonged to Soraya's grandmother. No jewels, no earrings, just the dress, the pin, and the woman. At 7:12, Soraya stood at the top of the staircase and waited for the chatter below to settle into the particular hush that always falls over a room when something unexpected enters it. Then she came down. She came down slowly, not theatrically. The dress was its own argument. The deep storm blue catching the light of the chandeliers, the beadwork along the hem flickering like distant lightning, the cut so unlike anything any woman in the room was wearing that the silence spread through the great hall in widening rings, table by table, until even the violinist by the south window faltered for a half beat before recovering. 42 faces turned to look at her. Matteo, at the foot of the stairs, was the last to look up. When he did, something in his face changed. It was not desire. It was not pride of ownership. It was the look of a man seeing, at the bottom of a glass he has been drinking from for 100 days. A coin he never knew was there. Soraya, he said quietly when she reached the floor. Matteo. He offered his arm. She took it. Not as a wife is led, but as an equal walking beside a man into a room they had agreed to enter together. The first to approach was Donna Bianca. That is a striking gown, my dear. Is it new? It was made by my mother. Donna Bianca's smile thinned. How sentimental. Yes, said Soraya pleasantly. I think so too. The Donna moved on. A woman in burgundy approached next. Older, with the upright bearing of a person who had not been told no by anyone in a very long time. She extended a hand glittering with rings. Magdalena Halabi, I don't believe we've been introduced properly. Soraya Vance. The hand paused. Vance? My maiden name. I prefer to keep it where I can find it. Magdalena Halabi looked at her for a long second. Then, slowly, deliberately, she smiled. My dear, she murmured, you're going to be interesting tonight. She moved on before Matteo could reply. The next person to approach was a tall, gray-haired figure with intelligent eyes who introduced himself as Bastian Adeyemi, the head of the Adeyemi family, an old rival of the Castellans. He bowed slightly over Soraya's hand. Mrs. Castellan, may I say, I knew your grandfather. Diplomatic service. A good man. Thank you. He spoke of you, I think. Did he? I would be flattered to know what he said. He said you were the only man at any negotiating table who could be trusted to keep his word once it was given. Bastian Adeyemi's eyes warmed. Then I owe him a debt I will now extend to you. If you should ever need a friend in a difficult room, Mrs. Castellan, I am one. Matteo had gone very quiet beside her. How did you know that about Adeyemi? He asked, low. My grandfather kept letters. My mother kept the letters. I read them. You've been studying. I've had a great deal of time on my hands, Matteo. They were called to the table. The seating was as Soraya had memorized. Matteo at the head, Donna Bianca to his right, Soraya to his left, Renzo beside Soraya. Across from her, 8 seats down, beside the Lindqvists, sat a man she had not spoken to since her wedding morning, her father. Idris Vance had not been on the original guest list. She had checked. He had been added in the past 48 hours, and as her eyes met his across the candlelight, she understood that the request had been her husband's. Matteo had brought her father here tonight, to watch. The first course arrived. Soraya picked up her spoon with a hand that did not tremble, and across the table her father's eyes did not leave her face. And Soraya understood in that suspended candlelit moment that the night had not yet begun. It was about to. The third course had just been cleared when Donna Bianca decided she had waited long enough. The conversation had grown loose with wine. Matteo was speaking quietly with Bastian Adeyemi. Soraya had eaten little and let the room settle into the false comfort of believing she was the quiet wife, the decorative one, the womb in a borrowed blue dress. Donna Bianca lifted her wine glass. "I would like to propose a toast to my daughter-in-law, to Soraya, who has graced us with her presence tonight, and who I am told has been adapting so beautifully to her new responsibilities." The conversation thinned. "Family is everything," Donna Bianca continued, eyes warm, smile colder. "And the first duty of a wife is to give a family its future. We are all, of course, waiting to celebrate that future." Magdalena Halabi did not smile. Bastian Adeyemi did not lift his glass. Matteo, very quietly, set down his fork. Soraya placed her napkin beside her plate. "Donna," she said. Her voice was not loud, but the great hall was suddenly very quiet. The way a hall goes quiet when a door has been opened that everyone has been politely pretending was not there. "May I respond to that toast?" Donna Bianca's smile thinned. "Of course, dear." Soraya rose. She did not lift a glass. She stood beside her chair in her mother's blue dress, hands at her sides, and began to speak. "3 months ago, I was married in a cathedral I had not chosen, to a man I had not chosen, in front of 200 guests. I was 22 years old. Until 3 weeks before that morning, I had been a third-year medical student. I was studying to be a surgeon. I had been told I had hands that did not shake. The table did not breathe. 21 nights ago, I overheard my husband say to a friend that I was a womb. Nothing more. That if I did not produce a son by spring, the marriage would be annulled. Those were his exact words." Down the table, someone's wineglass struck a plate. Matteo did not move. He was staring at her with the expression of a man watching a building he had built come apart at the seams. "I am not telling you this for sympathy. I have come here, in a dress my mother made for me in secret while I was being measured for someone else's, to say it out loud, in front of every family that conducts business with this house, so that no one in this room can ever again pretend they did not hear it. My name is Soraya Vance, not Castellan. Beginning tomorrow morning, I am returning to medical school. I have been reinstated. I have an aunt in the north whose treatment my husband has agreed, in writing, to fund for 3 years, and I will be holding him to that contract whether or not he chooses to remain my husband. I will be finishing my degree. I will be practicing medicine. I will be living a life I choose. Whether I do that as Mrs. Castellan or as a free woman is a decision I am leaving to my husband, in front of all of you, tonight." The silence in the hall was the kind of silence that has weight, that can be felt on the skin. Donna Bianca had gone the color of old paper. "This is," the Donna began. "This is highly—" "I'm not finished, Donna." The older woman's mouth closed. "There is one more thing." Soraya turned slightly until she was looking down the long candlelit table at her father. "Idris Vance. My father. You did not visit me once in 3 months. You did not write. You traded me to settle a debt to a family I had never met, and you did not so much as ask whether I would survive it." She let that sit in the air. "I survived it, and whatever debt you settled by handing me over, I do not consider it paid. The next time you sit at a table like this one, you will sit at it without me at the other end of it." Idris Vance's hand was shaking on his glass. He did not speak. Soraya turned back to the room. "That is the toast I have to offer tonight, Donna Bianca. Not to a future child. To a future self. Mine. To every woman at this table who has been told she is a vessel, a name, a peace treaty. I see you. I have been you. And if a single one of you remembers a moment when you might have stood up and you didn't, you still can. The dress can be borrowed. The voice cannot. She lifted her water glass and tilted it once toward the great hall. To honesty, the most expensive thing in this room. She drank. She set the glass down. The silence that followed was the held breath before a storm breaks. And then, from 8 seats down, Magdalena Halabi rose and lifted her glass, and beside her, Bastian Adeyemi rose. And then another. And then, slowly, almost as if surprised at himself, Renzo Vasari rose, looked once at Matteo, then at Soraya, and lifted his glass. To honesty, Renzo said, very quietly, the most expensive thing in this room. One by one, more than half the table rose. Donna Bianca did not rise. Her hand was a fist on the linen. And Matteo, at the head of his own table, in front of every family that did business with him, looked up at his wife with an expression no one in the great hall had ever seen on his face before. It was not anger. It was not shame. It was recognition. He pushed back his chair. He stood. The great hall went absolutely still. He picked up his glass. To honesty, Matteo said, looking only at her. The most expensive thing in this room. He drank, and in that moment Soraya Vance, who had stopped folding herself smaller a long time ago, looked back at her husband across the candlelight and understood that she had not, in fact, ended her marriage tonight. She had ended an arrangement. What came next would be something else entirely. She left before dessert. Not in a scene. Not in fury. She simply set down her napkin, said goodnight to the table in a voice that no longer trembled at anything, walked the length of the great hall in her mother's blue dress, and climbed the stairs. She heard behind her the room exhale. She did not turn around. Yusra was waiting in her room, eyes wet, a small leather suitcase already open on the bed. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. Soraya stepped out of the dress with the same care she had stepped into it, and Yusra hung it in the garment bag her mother had sewn it into. By midnight she was in a car. By 2 in the morning she was in a small hotel in the city, paid for in cash, registered under her grandmother's maiden name. She sat on the edge of the bed in a sweater and jeans she had not worn in 3 months, and she let herself, finally, for the first time since her wedding morning, cry. She cried for 10 minutes. Then she stopped. She opened her notebook, drew a clean line under the last entry, and wrote 2 words. Day 1. The story broke at sunrise. She did not know how. Later, she would suspect Magdalena Halabi, or perhaps a journalist Bastian Adeyemi had quietly tipped off. But by 7 in the morning, the news that the wife of Matteo Castellan had stood up at the founder's banquet and renounced her own arrangement was on 3 different morning news sites. By 9, the hotel switchboard had taken 11 calls for Mrs. Castellan. Soraya did not answer any of them. By 11, there was a knock at her door. She looked through the peephole. It was Renzo Vasari. She opened the door an inch, no more. How did you find me? I'm Matteo's consigliere, Soraya. Finding you is what I do. He held up a small paper bag from a bakery. Yusra's nephew told me which bakery you used to walk past as a student. I guessed. She let him in. He set the bag on the small table by the window. He looked tired. He looked, possibly, relieved. Matteo wanted me to bring you a message. And what does Matteo want me to know? He wants you to know that the marriage is dissolved. As of an hour ago. He is filing the paperwork himself. He is not contesting the contract for your aunt. He is not contesting your departure. He is not requesting that you return. Soraya did not answer. He also wants you to know, Renzo continued, that he understands now. What he was. What he did. He does not expect forgiveness. He asked me to tell you only this. That you were the first person who walked into that house in 20 years, who refused to become something smaller than you arrived, And he wishes he had been the kind of man who could have noticed that on the first day instead of on the 90th. Soraya looked out the window. The morning was overcast. A street sweeper was moving slowly along the curb 3 floors below. "Thank you, Renzo. There is one more thing." She turned. Renzo reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Plain. White. Sealed with wax. He set it on the table beside the bakery bag. "This was in his desk. He asked me to give it to you. I have not read it." She looked at it. She did not pick it up. "What is it?" "I don't know. I think it is the truth he could not say in a room with 42 people in it." Renzo paused at the door. "Soraya, for what it is worth, I am glad I lived to see what I saw last night. I have worked for that family for 16 years. You opened a door we had all stopped knocking on." He inclined his head and left. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she sat down at the table, opened the envelope, and read what Matteo had written. She did not show the letter to anyone. Not then. Not later. She read it twice, folded it, and slid it between the pages of her notebook beside her mother's note, and what was in it stayed between her and a man she would not see again for 1 full year. What she did, after she read it, was call Professor Idowu. "I'm coming back," she said. "I can be there Monday." "I'll have your white coat ready," Idowu said. Soraya hung up. She walked to the window, watched the street sweeper finish his slow, careful row along the curb, and she understood that she was, against all odds, free. She also understood that freedom was only a beginning. A year passed. The medical school did not coddle her. She returned in the autumn term, took her oral defense in front of a panel of 7 physicians, and graduated in the top 1% of her class on a Tuesday morning in late spring, in a small ceremony attended by her mother, her Aunt Naima, fully recovered, in a yellow dress, Yusra Ahmadi, and Professor Adesua Idowu, who cried twice, and pretended both times that it was the heat. Her father was not there. She accepted a residency in trauma surgery at a public hospital on the east side of the city. She worked nights. She was happier than she had ever been in her life. The story had done its work without her. 3 other women, wives of 3 other families, had left their marriages that spring. 2 had written her letters. She had answered both, by hand, signed SV. She did not see Matteo for an entire year. He had, she learned through Renzo, who began, after the first 3 months, to send her short letters every few weeks, sold 3 of the family's most violent holdings. He had stepped down as head of the Castellan family in favor of his cousin. He had moved to a small house in the hills, learning how to be a person who is not a Castellan first. The letter Matteo had written her sat in her notebook for 12 months. On the anniversary of the banquet, exactly 1 year to the night, she took it out and read it again. Then she did something she had not planned to do. She wrote a reply. 3 paragraphs. She did not promise anything. She did not forgive anything. She simply said that if he wished to meet, once in a public place, she would not object. She mailed it to the address Renzo had quietly slipped into one of his letters 6 months before. He answered in 3 days. They met on a Saturday afternoon in late October at an open-air cafe 2 blocks from her hospital. She came directly from a 14-hour shift, with her hair pulled back in a clip and no makeup at all. He was already there. He stood up when he saw her. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been spending time outdoors. His face was less cut. His eyes were less tired. "Soraya." "Matteo." She sat down. Between them on the small iron table was a single cup of black coffee. "How is your aunt?" "She's well. She sends her thanks. She does not, I should be clear, send her forgiveness, but she sends her thanks." He nodded. "That is more than I would have given me." The waitress came. Soraya ordered tea. "Why did you write to me?" he asked eventually. Because I read your letter again, and I wanted to tell you, in person, that I believed it. Which part? The last paragraph. He looked away, then back. His mouth tightened in something that, on another man, would have been a smile. Thank you, Soraya. The tea came. They spoke for nearly 2 hours of small things. They did not speak of the banquet. They did not speak of the marriage. When they parted, she did not let him walk her back to the hospital, and he did not ask to. He said, "May I write to you sometimes?" Sometimes. That was what they began with. It was enough. A year after that, 2 years to the night from the founder's banquet, Soraya Vance, MD, performed her first solo trauma surgery. The patient survived. She walked out of the operating theater at 4 in the morning, took off her surgical cap, and stood under the fluorescent lights of the corridor with her hands still pink from scrubbing. She thought about her mother, now living with Naima in the north, in the house Mateo's money had restored. She thought about her grandmother, who had not lived to see this. She thought about the girl in the gray silk dress in the dark window of the Castellan estate, 3 months into a marriage that was supposed to consume her. She thought about her, that girl, with great tenderness. And she thought, you stopped folding yourself smaller a long time ago, and tonight, you saved a life. She did not yet know whether the man in the hills would, one day, become someone she chose for herself, on her own terms, in her own time. That part of her story was not yet written, and she was, for the first time in her life, the only one holding the pen. She had heard once, through a closed door, the worst thing a man could say about a woman he claimed to love. And in the 21 days that followed, she had used those words to build the only life that had ever truly belonged to her. If you have made it to the end of this story, and any part of it has reached you, drop a single word in the comments below. Heard. Just heard. Because somewhere tonight, there is a woman standing in a hallway holding a tray, listening to a door she should not be listening at, and she is wondering whether she is alone. Tell her she isn't. That is the only ending this story has ever needed.